You're listening to the Wilmac Wire, the podcast that's designed to give you a glimpse into a growing SaaS company, specifically in the realm of customer interaction technology. From customer experience to data management, we'll talk about it here. Thank you for tuning in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Wilmac Wire. I have two friendly faces on this podcast episode with me this morning, but one of them you recognize and have likely heard from before, and the other one's new. So I'll start with the one you probably know and recognize the Scottish accent from, but that is Charlie Snedden, one of our sales engineers here at Wilmac Technologies. He's been on a few episodes of the Wilmac Wire so far and blessed us with his presence again today. And then new to the podcast, a new guest and another fun accent, this time an English one, is Gary White, who is a sales rep here at Wilmac Technologies. So before we jump into the podcast itself, Gary, I just wanted to say welcome to the show. And I want to ask you to just share a little bit about yourself and your role at Wilmac.
Yeah, thanks, Em. Thanks for inviting me. I've been at Wilmac now for 3 years. Moved over to Canada. So I'm getting messaged at the same time here now. Bloody hell. Anyway, sorry. I've been at Wilmac for about 3 years. I moved here to Canada from the UK about 3 years ago. I've been in the industry for nearly 13 years at a similar company in the UK. I've worked closely with Steve and some of the other people at Wilmac, and they asked me to come over to really champion continuity replay. And in that 3-year period, we've had a lot of success and seen continuity replay become, I always say, kind of our leading product solution with our customers in a multitude of ways. And pleased to talk about some of those challenges and how we resolve them today.
Yeah, definitely. We joined Wilmac, Gary, right around the same time. So
did we?
Both, I joined like 3 months before you. Get out of here. So yeah, that's all right though. Thank you for sharing.
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yes, tell me about it. When I get to work with Gary and Charlie every day, time goes by fast. Okay, so with this episode, Gary touched on it a little bit, but we're going to chat with the both of them about a unique situation they came into with a recent customer. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that this customer faced and how we navigated a little bit of the uncertainty of the situation. We're going to keep the name of the customer anonymous since we're talking obviously about sensitive data and situations, but all you need to know is that this company operates in the gas and utilities industry globally. So we won't say their name. And if we do, I will edit it out afterwards. But anyway, so we'll start with how this problem came about with this customer. Gary, what was going on when we originally engaged with them?
When we originally engaged with them, we actually engaged with them. So they've been a customer for about 2.5 years. They're a very large organization. As many gas and utilities, they have a control room section of their business, and we actually helped them on their control room section with what I would say is a very traditional use case for continuity. They had legacy NICE recordings. They wanted to consolidate and remove those legacy servers, as well as NICE Eventide recording as well, I think it was at the time. So very traditional sense and very good customer in that respect, but we've never really engaged with their contact center side. And we started that conversation about 12 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, predominantly around, again, traditional use case of legacy. Where they were in their technology phase was they were using NICE Engage, and that transition was fairly sorted and they had a good approach to legacy data. So we didn't really see a value for us at that time, but what they approached us with, what they did have a challenge was the last 4 years of recordings that they had. There were concerns that they had breached PCI. They had pause and resume controls in their call recording. Anyone in the industry will know pause and resume, even automated, is not 100% foolproof. and there was some deep concerns that they had collected PCI information. What we mean by that is kind of CVV numbers, those types of things were collected and recorded on calls. So they were advised or looking for ways that they could safeguard this risk and remove this risk from and manage it more appropriately than they were doing. Because at the moment, all of this last 4 years of data was just collected within everything else that they were collecting. And there was no real way to kind of discernibly put a ring fence around that information, if you will. So by working with a partner who was actually hosting that environment, we did two things. Firstly, our extraction services pinpointed the exact call frame or the time frames they were interested in. What are the calls at risk? And then we can extract and convert those and take them out of their current NICE system. But they still needed access to these data. This is the last 4 years of data. They still need QA purposes, retention purposes, litigation purposes. So what we are doing is moving that data to the partner's environment, which is then containerized in a way, firewall, security access, those types of things, and building a service around managing that data through its retention cycle for the next, I think it's the next 4 to 5 years, right, Charlie, that they're keeping that data for.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and almost kind of create a containerized environment for PCI data. They still have access to the calls, but it's off network, it's off their, I don't want to say responsibility, but they've moved the responsibility and can now adhere to PCI compliance when they do breach that data, and therefore avoid the fines, avoid the security concerns, avoid the contamination, I suppose, of other data sets as well, network. So the reason why I wanted to share that today, and we talked about this a couple of weeks back, and I said this would be a really good story to share. It's a very unique one, and it's one that we've never really been asked. We've always looked at continuity through the lens of legacy data, consolidation of machines, removing those legacy servers, or connecting to production environments, giving you more control over your data, bringing that down, storing that in different places from cloud vendors, for example. And that's the lens we always approach continuity replay with. This customer and this particular challenge gives us a very different lens to look at it through, and a very different use case for continuity. And I think a very unique one as well that most customers will resonate with. PCI is problematic for all customers to adhere to. And continually adhere to, because it's an annual process for them to showcase that they are doing so. Just realize I'm talking a lot here, Charlie. Do you want?
No, I was just waiting for my time there. I think where you were going with this is the kind of 6 overarching control objectives by PCI. And these are the challenges that organizations have, not challenges, but they have to demonstrate that they maintain these, make sure the network's secure, protect the cardholder details, maintain any vulnerabilities of their network or systems that they've implemented, and the access controls. And I think, for where I came into it, and some of the kind of objectives that I had to convey during the project was to demonstrate the access controls, to demonstrate that it's a secure network, and I think that's where you were going with that. The annual review for this particular customer brought up that they had this pool of data, let's call it toxic data or contaminated, as you mentioned, and they needed to do something with it, and it was easy for them to speak with us and for us to come up with a solution.
Yeah, and I think a good thing, what the customer will say quite openly is, they explored a lot of options here. There's a lot of different options that they could do, and internally handling that data was too difficult an option for them. And when I say difficult, there was unforeseen commercial consequences, or perhaps their network infrastructure or technology stack didn't really allow them the flexibility to handle this in an efficient and appropriate way, and without effectively changing all of their infrastructure, which at the size of contact center they were, is just unfeasible. And then all the way down to other options of should we just purge this data where you're losing 4 years worth of customer data, which in itself, notwithstanding all the quality and insight that you might get from analytics, also the compliance issues there was mind-boggling. So being able to work with them and very openly kind of build this option for them. It's not something that we necessarily designed continuity for, but the skills and the way we've designed continuity allows us to be flexible enough to meet what they wanted to see and almost kind of build this out for them without having to go back to the drawing board and develop it again. Sorry, Charlie.
No, exactly. With continuity to replay the role-based access controls, we've got the secure data storage that we have, that all provided what they needed. It was almost like off the shelf. Where it became a little bit more, or where it was more different than a standard implementation, was the access to those calls. You talked about the infrastructure change and everything that they would need to implement to make this available to them. We had to create a process which allowed them to access the calls when they needed, but only specific calls at specific times. So rather than having access to every single call on the platform, I would only give Gary access to 2 of the calls that he needed to listen to at that time.
Yeah.
And implementing that change across an established network and infrastructure is a big challenge. It's just inconceivably expensive to do things like that at a drop of a hat. Whereas speaking with us, being able to identify our help them, and we maintain the kind of 6 pillars of the PCI requirements, they were happy to speak to us further.
You guys are on such a good roll here, and I don't want to keep the ball rolling, but I guess a question I have is, when this originally came up and they came to us about it, how did you guys react? Because I mean, that's not
Honestly,
a typical use,
honestly, I mean, the good thing was, before this, we had built up a lot of goodwill with the partner and the customer in question because, we've had successful projects with them. And I'm not sure if it would have come up necessarily if we didn't already have that foundation of trust in doing so, but in delivery of what we've done previously. But honestly, when it came up first, I certainly was hesitant to look at it. There was a lot more questions than answers from our perspective, to be frank. And and I know as a salesperson, sometimes we get painted that we say yes to everything, and of course that's easy, or it's easily done. It's not necessarily always the case, but what was good about our process was, and it's good in any engagement that we have of this nature, is we were very strict in how we investigated it. We were very what's the word I'm trying to think of? Very detailed in our approach to the considerations that we would have to take into place, because ultimately any option that we would come back with, we'd have to not only sign off, but the customer would have to sign off to their relevant PCI controls. And the customer was almost, trusting us to provide that information. So the first initial reaction was one of, this is going to be tough. And I'm not sure we can facilitate it. But it speaks volumes about our development process and our engineering process here at Wilmac that, okay, but let's look at the reasons why, or how could we actually do this, and pillars of which we can actually do this. Charlie talked about the PCI pillars, infrastructure, all these types of things in conjunction with the partner. And then between us both came back with an options that we were very happy to recommend and happy for the customer to trust us on. And that was, roughly from initial engagement, a 2-3 month process. We actually then paused the interaction. As things do, things changed. Some internal things changed, some internal direction changed. We actually felt, okay, it's a nice option, but we might go into a different direction now. And the company explored other options as well. I think they were doing that on the direction of their PCI consultants. So, naturally these things change, but then probably around about 4 months ago, it restarted. This is actually still an issue. I think there are also some budgetary and financial things involved. Money had freed up last year, so they were a bit more forthwith, I suppose, of what they could do from a project perspective. But the point is, the timing aligned to do something at that point, and that option still was, we had to ratify it and go back through it all again and make sure that, dot the I's, cross the T's, as it were. But because we've done that initial work, it was well understood by the customer and
Right.
was already vetted internally as a viable option. So it was a long process, but for something that is quite unique for all parties involved, and it's not a unique challenge by any means, but certainly a unique solution in a sense, and something different than we were doing. I think it's important that we vetted it. So, long answer to your question there, Em, but
Good answer, though.
it makes me laugh though when you're like, "What's your initial reaction?" I probably said some curse words on the phone to Charlie after the call, and so I don't think that's possible. But here we are. I'm glad I'm proved wrong, and it speaks
Yeah.
volumes about our process. So.
I think it also, like, you touched on a few really good things there, but I want to call out too, like, the fact that you guys have so much experience in the industry, and you're like, yeah, this is probably a common problem that many people are dealing with. We've never solved for it ourselves, but that doesn't mean we can't. We have a development team now. Charlie, I know, and Gary, you both work very closely with Bob and his team to chat about the new use cases that are popping up and what additional value can continuity bring to the table. So, I just think it's a cool story. Like you said, Gary, it's a unique situation that we personally at Wilmac don't deal with often. So,
we deal with it from the other side. I mean, traditionally, most customers, if they're worried that they have breached PCI or they have contaminated data or toxic data, as Charlie mentioned, we might start talking about redaction. We might start talking about those types of things which are connected with continuity, and we have plenty of those conversations. Here it's almost kind of taking and saying, understanding it's toxic, and I think we actually looked at redaction for them as well as a potential option, and that, given the size of data, the amount of data, and just the amount of throughput, by the time they finish the redactions, the data would almost, its life cycle would be incomplete, done. So that's 4 years, 3 years worth of risk they would have had to do. So, we always kind of discounted that option straight out the bat, but we never looked at it kind of, I don't want to say but this is, taking it data and controlling it and saying, okay, well, because the PCI controls do give you what happens if there is a breach. How do you best manage if there is a breach? And to be honest with you, 100% of companies have breached in some facet. There's no doubt about it in my mind. It's just whether they A, know about it, or B, if they do know about it, if it's managed internally appropriately. And the PCI controls give you that leeway to kind of manage that internally. And it's just about satisfying those controls. And that's the challenge that we solved for this particular customer. They didn't have the controls to manage a breach.
Well, not only that, is having the data management controls through continuity replay allowed them to de-scope their entire network from the PCI, the PCI audits, if you will. Whereas if they had this information in their network, then their entire infrastructure would come under scope and have to be audited. So this makes the auditing and the management of that much simpler because it's in its own secure area. The access to that is controlled. The people who have their access controls is managed to a degree as well. And we spoke about working with the development team and seeing use cases that don't come up that often. Our product is designed to work with single sign-on, LDAP, for example, as well. And in this particular example, they wanted to deploy multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, the ability to not only have a username and password, but some other methodology of securing that. So we had to look outside of our realm and introduce other tools to produce that. And we've successfully integrated with those third-party tools. Again, Bob's team and Bob helped that to fruition.
Definitely.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
a big, I mean, I'm a big proponent of, I mean, anyone who's ever been on like a sales call with me and engaged with me in terms of continuity replay, will know my kind of tagline is always kind of continuity is built around data. It's your data. What do you want to do with it? How do you want to access it? Where do you want to store it? You know, give yourself back control of your data. And you know, like I said earlier, we talked about it through the lens of legacy and production data and the business cases that we understand, but it works. So it's such a good example of this in this scenario. You know, this was a data breach, and then we just gave them the flexibility to do what they needed to do, that data, efficiently and effectively. You know, they could have done a number of other things, but probably would have cost them 5 times more than the effort that we were doing. And in fact, we know from some of the engagements that we had with their team, they would have done. So, yeah, it's a really good story for us, I think.
100% agree. And I appreciate you guys hopping on with me to share it. We're always, like you said, exploring the new use cases for continuity replay. And Charlie, I know you and I have been chatting a bit about a newer use case that we're seeing in the production realm, in the long-term storage within CCaaS platforms. Do you just want to touch on that briefly before we close?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gary mentioned a couple of times in the conversation there about production calls, and what we mean by production calls is calls that are happening today. You know, from this day forward, these are the calls that we're recording, being captured, and they need to be archived off. So, you know, there's solutions out there in the CCaaS world which will do the recording and they will store it in the cloud storage, but it doesn't give you the control. Other than it's there, you can access it from that platform. As Gary mentioned before, you might want to take back that control, own that call recording, have it in your environment, be that your cloud or your on-premise side of things. But what we have been coming up against is that some of our customers are expressing that cloud vendors' storage, maybe Glacier storage, is a little bit more expensive than they think they can get through other vendors like AWS or Azure. And we can help facilitate that. We can help facilitate them retrieving their data from the CCaaS vendor and keeping it in a low-cost storage environment like AWS, which is the backbone of our product. So we utilize AWS S3 and continuity replay, and the customer benefits from those cost savings. The other great thing about that is it gives them their data back. They can run analytics on it outside of the CCaaS platform. They can have third parties do redaction on it to make it even more secure. There's lots of things that you can do when you've got your data back in your environment.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, for this customer in question, we have a secondary phase that'll be the summer this year. We'll be working on a project for them to deliver other recorded data to a new analytics vendor that they'll be deploying. So again, we do so many things in there now, which is great. But again, it's that data flexibility, like Charlie said, giving them control. Where do you want your data to be? How do you want to use your data? Yeah. And it's not just I need to make use of best of storage efficiencies, which essentially is what the CCaaS play is, because the value of a call diminishes after 12 months from a QA perspective. And you want that to reflect in the storage mechanism that you're using, but the ability to then manipulate your data and push it where it needs to go or where you want it to go is huge. So
definitely. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing more about that, and appreciate the time that you took today. I know you both are super busy, and Gary, I'm just going to use a bunch of your quotes and taglines and just paste it on our website. So you're doing my job for me.
This is why I said no to the
yeah, exactly.
Just stealing my thunder.
I know. All right. I'll wrap up the episode then today. Thank you, Gary and Charlie, for joining me on the Wilmac Wire. Charlie, a repeat, and Gary, a fresh face for our listeners. And it's just great from the marketing side of things. I'm so often out there pushing drawing attention to the challenges that we're solving for and the great things that we're doing, but actually hearing a success story, it's very powerful. So, as always, great work to you guys and everyone involved in that particular use case. And we'll definitely have more stories to discuss this season on the Wilmac Wire. I promise, Gary, I won't bother you too often for it. So,
Have you
anyway.
made that promise?
My fingers were crossed. You couldn't see that. Anyway, so if you are interested in learning more about continuity replay or connecting with Gary and Charlie, you can find Gary and Charlie specifically on LinkedIn and connect with them through their profiles. To learn more about continuity replay, you can check out Wilmac's website along with our LinkedIn company page. So again, thank you, Charlie and Gary, for your time today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. This was episode 5 of the Wilmac Wire. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wilmac Wire. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or visiting our website at www.wilmactech.com. You can also watch the full video recordings of every episode on our YouTube channel. Thank you for being a part of our community, and again, thank you for listening to the Wilmac Wire.